Hello, this is Clarifying Thought. My name is Michael Greenker. I'm here with my associate, David Kasha. We've begun this podcast and stream as an effort to look at current events as well as some more broad underlying principles that might be affecting them. We both have philosophical backgrounds. I'm currently studying Buddhism and learning classical Chinese to expand that endeavor. My interests also include philosophy of mind and economics.
All right. Thanks for that, Mike. I'm Dave. This is the Clarifying Thought podcast, and I have a background in philosophy and psychology. My background in psychology is a focus mostly in neuroscience and the psychology of trauma. And my background in philosophy is mostly in Southeast Asian philosophy, specifically Buddhism and specifically Buddhist logic. I wrote my master's thesis on a very obscure Buddhist logician, and my interests range anywhere from markets to politics, um, choice, and the modern age, and where we're headed. So, without further ado, let's get started on our first topic of the day, which is what is a person? Mike, recently we started looking at the book. Um, what you just sent it to me, it's escaping me now, but I have it for
Being no
us.
one?
Being No One. Luckily, I have it available for us. If it will show up. Oh, you know what? It's not open anymore.
Hmm.
Let me get it real quick. Let me while I'm getting this, why don't you tell us why you became interested in the book and maybe a little bit about why you think it's relevant to the topic, what it is to be a person or what is a
Hmm.
person.
Well, Being No One is by a prominent philosopher named Thomas Metzinger. I initially learned about the book through a science fiction novel called Blind Sight by Peter Watt. Blind Sight is a superb novel. It is taught occasionally in undergraduate philosophy of mind and cognitive science courses because of just how hard his science fiction is. And he references the book Being No One over the course of using a science fiction scenario using advanced technology to deconstruct what the meaning of I is. And the reason I think it's relevant to the question, what is a person, is the concept of a soul has been largely dispensed with in science over the past century and a half. And the concept of an ego is coming under more and more scrutiny in the sense that a lot of philosophers, Daniel Dennett among others, argue that there is no thing, no permanent uh, object that is a self, and that our experience of selfness, our unified perception and memory of past events that we associate with a body and a name, is effectively a constructed illusion.
Sure.
Metz,
Okay. And where
Metzinger
what's
used
a where could you be just a little bit more specific about I guess the background of that idea just a little bit before we get into the weeds
hmm,
of the
well,
idea that there is no self. I mean, you gave us a more contemporary understanding of that, but obviously there's a little bit more there from the
oh
past.
yeah. The background, it goes all the way back to the Buddha in the 400 to 300 BCE, or was earlier. I can never remember the dates, but during the
It's Indian
axiomatic age, when
philosophy. It's
it's
really
Indian
hard to
philosophy.
know.
Yeah.
The
Uh,
Indians are not known for their dating.
well, the Indians, it's interesting. The contemporary Indian philosophy at the time of the Buddha uh, had a notion of a universal self, an Atman. And
Right,
one of the Buddha's primary revelations was that the Atman does not exist. And the term is anatman that he
right.
uses, or anika in Pali, no self. Uh, and which is not, again, to say that persons don't exist, but that there is no self that is permanent and unchanging. Uh, there's no intrinsic unit, indivisible and atomic, outside of what we see, what we hear, what we feel, and the composition of our body. There's no extra stuff.
And this is
And
the
the
con.
Buddha's,
I'm sorry. Keep going.
oh, the Buddha's fairly unique in producing this idea. Most other philosophies throughout the world had some notion of self, whether it was at the level of the individual or at the level of gods or universal spirits. It wasn't in the West until there may have been some pre-Socratic philosophers. I know Democritus viewed everything as changing. There might have been some Greeks who were talking about self not existing outside of the physical body. But by and large, Greek philosophy wound up running with the Platonic conception of the ideal self. And that was
Yeah.
the grid through which reality was viewed in the West up until, I would say, David Hume
Yeah, the
was the
pre-Socratic
first.
philosophers didn't really have much of a concept of self. They were mostly concerned with like ideas of nature
Mhm.
and the reality surrounding the experiencer as opposed to the nature of the experiencer, which surprisingly, during the same time we see the Buddha and Plato and Socrates,
Confucius,
Confucius, we
Lao
see
Tzu.
we see, yep, we see, well, Lao Tzu. I get Lao Tzu more in relationship to like the what is it to be a leader. I'm not sure that there's necessarily a definition of the person in the Tao Te Ching, but maybe there is. Um, that would be something to look at, actually. There might be.
It would.
There certainly seems
But
to
the
be
sage.
yeah, exactly the definition of what we would call a sage. Um, yeah. So yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to
Oh,
add
you're
that
all right.
little piece to what you were saying, that we don't really see that the introduction of concepts of soul and their opposition until around the 400 BCE for some reason.
Yeah, there may not be an explicit concept of self, but there's no explicit concept of no self either.
Right.
And that's what I meant when I said the Buddha was fairly unique, is that he addresses explicitly the non-existence of self as opposed to simply not mentioning it.
Right.
And again, David Hume is the one who arrives at that point in the West. Uh, Scottish British philosopher, 17th century, 18th century, wrote about what is described as the bundle theory, the idea that there are no selves outside of the physical collection of sensations and experiences and what have you. And also that everything is determined by causes, which in some sense there's a lot of Buddhism that can be read into Hume and vice versa. I haven't researched the details of those connections, but it's fairly clear that they, at least independently, arrive at similar conclusions regarding whether there's an extra something, an extra soul, an extra spark, a seat of consciousness. Um,
And then
and
in response to that, we see Descartes. Right.
yes, Descartes said, well, not in response. Not in
I
response to Hume.
I
I think
I
Hume was
think
responding to Descartes.
I think that there was some interlocution, at least in their works. It seems, but at least from my education, I seem to remember there being some interlocution between Descartes seeing Hume's work and Hume seeing Descartes' work, and them
Hmm.
thinking kind of different things about the nature of what it was to be a self, right? With Descartes saying, "I think, therefore I am," and Hume questioning the nature of inference itself.
Yep, Descartes. I mean, he was, and that's the basic intuition that most people have is, of course, selves exist because I exist and I perceive myself as a self. And Descartes, that was Descartes' big thing, is that you cannot deny the the reality of this perception. And his inference was that a perception needs a perceiver. Let's see, died 1650. Um,
I could be wrong with
so
their interlocutors, but I feel
I
like
mean,
they
Hume
were.
was um no, Hume was born after Descartes died. Hume was
Okay,
responding to Descartes.
no, Hume was responding to
Most
Descartes
Western
then.
philosophy was responding to Descartes. But
Fair enough.
overall, the
Can't believe I got that wrong.
rationalist.
Oh well.
Oh, it's okay. I mean, it's the larger rationalism empiricism debate, which was Hume was certainly responding to someone who
Right,
was probably following Descartes,
right.
uh, and the larger rationalist empiricist debate, which continues today. You know, rationally using logic and deduction, like following Descartes' argument, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, which I think is circular reasoning, but it could be an a fortiori. Um, the presence of thoughts implies the presence of a thinker or a perceiver of said thoughts.
Right.
And we get to that compared to the empirical side where, okay, if there's a self, let's observe it. You know, let's measure it, let's find where it's located, let's determine its qualities. And modern cognitive scientists are finding the more they observe, the less self there is to find and the fewer places there are for the self to hide.
Right.
Metzinger outlines the data, all of the experiments and studies that contradict the idea there could be a self, at least a permanent, unchanging self located within the body. Things like the rubber arm test, where a person's consciousness is effectively placed in a rubber arm and they feel what's happening to the rubber arm. That's been generalized to a full body test where using VR headsets and a camera behind a person so that they're viewing themselves from behind and then viewing the researcher stroking their back from behind, their sense of embodiment is translated forward. It's very bizarre to imagine without experiencing it, but nevertheless, the subjective feeling of embodiment is a product of a particular part of the brain, and it can easily be changed.
It's probably something to do with the anterior cingulate cortex activating in relationship to some occipital lobe, activation. Because so much of your brain is dedicated to vision, and we have such a sense of embodiment, right? When a lot of people, when they think about this, they think maybe like you can think about the VR where you're walking across a bridge, right? That sense of embodiment, then it seems like what you're saying, it extends further beyond that even to, um, well, to the to the motor or to the sensory neuron somehow in the cortex, right? And there's some down processing that causes you to feel the right. There's no actual nerve activation in your back, most likely. It's all up in the cortex
No,
in
there is.
relationship. There's a nerve activation in the nerve endings in the back.
Yes, the back is physically being stroked.
Oh, the back is physically being
And
stroked. I'm sorry, I
yes,
misunderstood you.
okay, it's like the hand. The way the rubber hand test works is your hand is physically being stroked, and you are also observing, but you can't see it. you're observing a rubber hand that is being
Oh,
stroked
right, right. And then what
simultaneously.
do they do to
Yeah.
this? Do they do this fake back then? Do they do something to
It's
this fake back?
they're the researcher is simply stroking your back. You're wearing a VR headset that is transmitting video of a camera that is placed behind you, so it looks like you're standing about 5 or 10 feet in front of your where you're actually standing.
Okay.
And it seems, again, from the subjective self-reporting, it seems as though it's like an out-of-body experience. One feels themselves to be standing 5 feet in front of where the visual
Oh, I
perception
see.
is taking place.
So they're creating a physical phenomena on the back and a visual phenomena of being not where the back is actually located in
Yes,
their phenomenological experience of things. They're standing 5 feet forward, but they're still experiencing this
yes.
experience of being stroked
The
on the back.
sensation is located in front of them, not behind them.
Oh, that's okay. So that's where we see the phenomena occur. That's
Yeah. And
fascinating. I'm sorry, I wasn't catching that. So that's really
it's
interesting. So how is it that the phenomena is being experienced in front of them? They're because they're placed in front of themselves visually, but their embodiment is they know that they're phenomenologically behind them. I mean, we hear this with like inner ear, where people like see themselves like outside of themselves, and they have these out of body experiences.
hmm or like phantom limb syndrome, which I had a brief experience of when I broke my arm because my actual arm where the bone was broken, my physical arm was pointing in one direction. My perception of arm, my interoceptive feeling arm, was in front of me. Like the physical arm and the ghost arm,
Right.
the consciousness arm, were in two different locations. So
I
that's
see.
what I imagine is going on there. The feeling that when somebody's scratching your back, the location of that feeling, the location of the back itself, is in front of the eyes in this.
That's weird. Okay. That's
And
very
it can
strange.
be, mm-hmm, I could try to find, because there's video of it as
But
well. I
doesn't
forget
so
where.
I guess to bring us back slightly to the point that we're trying to make is that
Mm-hmm.
what is a person? The topic that we're discussing here is that doesn't that just point to an indication that there is an experiencing self, right?
Oh yeah.
Doesn't that just reinforce excuse me, the concept that Descartes said, which is that I think therefore I am. I'm thinking I'm having an experience of my back being scratched. I'm thinking that I'm over here, and thus I have this weird kind of mismatch experience that my back is in front of me.
The it's
I feel like that can be explained more mechanically as well. I feel like it doesn't necessarily lend credence to a concept that we aren't selves, or actually maybe um, the thesis of this book, which is where I wanted to bring it, which what you were talking about earlier, where we kind of have these ideas. We've been proposed like selves. We proposed like the Atman, and then the Buddha proposed the Anatman, and then Descartes was talking about I think therefore I am, and then we have people like well, you were talking about the bundle theory of consciousness. I don't remember who came up with that
mm-hmm,
specifically.
Hume.
Hume, really? It's that old, huh? But the bundle theory of consciousness is, to me, just another self theory of consciousness. It just uh, reduces the problem of one self to miniature selves that do the same work of the self and actually doesn't get very far. Um, so that's kind of, I think, a really good overview of like what it is to be, um, like what it is considered, at least in the history of um, thought. I mean, we could go into like what the existentialists and stuff think, but I'm honestly not an expert in that field, and I would really make a fool of myself.
Mm.
So I won't say anything about what they think, but I can say that my general understanding from my education is that there is a self for the existentialists, and it's fundamental and unchanging, and it comes from the same concept that Descartes gave out when he said, I think, therefore I am. Some would say it's like logically primary or logically fundamental. It acts before everything else, right? And thus, like, kind of has these magical properties, right?
That's, I mean, that's the notion. That's a lot of there's a lot of inferential steps there. Another big thing that Peter Watts attacked in Blindsight is the notion that the self is acting prior. Uh, One thing that a lot of the data in here show, even including the sensory tests, the rubber arm and the back scratching and all that,
Mm,
is that the self is an effect, uh, and
that's fine.
action is because then you get into the hairy regions
But
of
that
free
but
will.
everything is the result of an effect. That doesn't.
Yeah.
Let's look at
Which,
this the thesis real quick
okay.
because I think it really clarifies the point very quick. And we've been using some of these concepts, and maybe this will like phenomenal and stuff like that. And maybe I should clarify what I mean by the word phenomenal before we get too far into the weeds with this, because it talks a lot about phenomenology, and all this other stuff. Phenomenology
Mm-hmm.
is probably the one thing we didn't touch on. That's probably pretty important for the at least the contemporary understanding of self, wouldn't you say? Maybe we should talk a little bit about phenomenology. I think phenomenology is probably really where most people, especially if they have any education regarding psychology, or any just basic understanding of the main cultural explanation of what it is to be a person. I think phenomenology, Sartre, Husserl, Heidegger, Simone de Beauvoir, um, others,
Merleau-Ponty.
Merleau-Ponty, and many others that I'm forgetting because my education was not
Bergson,
as diverse.
arguably.
Bergson,
Mm-hmm.
arguably, um, but other very important authors of color, um, many other
Mm.
women, um, a wonderful and beautiful tradition that is actually the foundation of um, some of the modern ideas around um, really concepts of personhood that we're dealing with today. Um,
Francisco Varela was a major neurophenomenologist
okay,
who was somewhat primary in the field of neuroscience generally.
but
Primary in the sense of being an early major contributor.
let me just define phenomenology real quick, um, with a quick definition that I got from the internet. Phenomenology is the philosophical study of structures of experience and consciousness as such. Um, but that's not what it says there. It just says structures and experience and consciousness. But I think that Dr. Olkowski would agree that as such should be there, because it phenomenology is the study of experience qua experience, through experience itself, using the experiencing self as a tool to study one's own experience.
It's
Um,
the first person perspective.
but the first
As
person perspective on one's perspective,
yes.
right? It is the reflection on perceiving, right? On the
Mm-hmm.
structure of one's own experience and one's consciousness from one's own experience and one's consciousness, which in
Yeah.
that sense it shares the types of circularity, right? That you kind of suspect in the statement, I think, therefore I am, and that you pointed to earlier, right? Is that we have this, there's this reflective nature of consciousness or experience. And maybe I'm wrong and I'm misrepresenting what you said there, but it seems as though that that creates this illusion that he points to in
Yeah,
this text.
the recursion theory, which Hofstadter put forward, that defining selves as self-reflective systems aware of their own awareness recursively. And you get a Hall of Mirrors effect if you're not careful. But with I think, therefore I am, there are two possibilities. One is that the grammatical particle I there in I think, is begging the question. He is using his own existence as a thinker to as as a premise, the conclusion of which is that the I exists. But the conclusion I exist is already assumed in the premise I think. Ergo, circular reasoning.
Right.
The other possibility is that it's an a fortiori argument. I think it is necessarily the case that the I exists because the I is thinking. Uh, I
That's
couldn't
what the
think if I didn't
phenomenologist
exist.
agrees. That's what the phenomenologist thinks. I would
And
say.
the assumption throughout, the assumption here to answer the question, what is a person, is identifying selfhood and existence with perception, with the locus of experience.
Right.
It,
That is primary. That is the what the history of thought on this topic has specifically addressed. Even though either explicitly or implicitly, it is that specific thing that you just mentioned there. Yeah. The
mm-hmm,
it's the experiencer, right, or the
it's
experience.
mm-hmm.
However you put it. How did you put that? What's the specific way you stated that?
The locus of perception.
The locus of perception.
Yeah,
Sure.
but foundational is perception, which then raises the question: are these web cameras selves, given that they are perceivers?
Well, I think that perception and representation of information is different. So these cameras represent information, but they don't perceive information. Perception, in my opinion, has the additional layer of meaning and structure and these other things. And that actually, I think, is what's interesting about phenomenology is that phenomenology gives you it gives you insight into the ability to do that, which is look at the constructed version of what is happening in what makes you a person, right? And whether or not phenomenology gives us access or, instantiates um, the locus of perception as the thing as a self or not, the phenomenal self, right? And the first person perspective, as it says, right?
Mm,
Is the main thesis, right, of this specific text is that there is no such thing as selves that exist in the world, and nobody has ever had a self, and all that has ever existed were conscious self models, right, that could not be recognized as models. So
yeah.
what he's saying is, as far as I can tell, is that the self, at least as constructed in phenomenology, is the model that is the relationship to the environment that manifests itself, that does all these things, right? That acts and has responses and has ideas and concepts. But the
Or at
I
least
there
believes that
is
it
that
does.
model, and that model is blind to its being a model. Now, it seems that you have given us two different ways in which that that could be, right? The a for what did you say? There's the a fortiori example, the necessary one, and the I don't remember the first one that you gave, but
Begging the question.
the one that where the I begs the question. Now it seems
Yeah.
that I doesn't beg the question because I presents itself in experience as such, right? So I wonder like whether or not that's something you would respond to.
Well, if you reformulate it as thinking exists, therefore thoughts exist, it becomes a tautology.
Yeah,
So that
that's true. Maybe an I
the
is a
idea,
maybe being an I is a tautological claim. Tautologies breed identities. So that's not like that doesn't necessarily mean that we Like, I mean, we've defined something there, actually. So I don't see what the issue is.
Um, the
Tautology isn't
issue,
always bad. Tautology
oh,
sometimes means you've actually hit some truth.
well, it simply doesn't produce any new information.
Well,
Like,
that's fine, but that's not the nature of, that's not the purpose of argument. The purpose of argument is to produce an outcome. And once you reach a tautology, you find that uh, you find that you've reached an outcome, which is that they're identical. You found an identity.
in this case, thinking and thoughts, or the
Yeah.
action of thinking with the act of existing, according to
Well,
Descartes.
that actually isn't what you just said, is it?
If thinking exists, therefore thoughts exist.
Well, okay, now, okay, sorry. But that's not what I think that you were trying to, that's not what I heard you going for there. Is that we added another layer of existence just now, but before I don't think we used existence. We just said thinking implies thought. But
Yes,
right, okay. And that thinking and thought
you're
aren't the
right.
same thing. But what Descartes has done, and I think this is interesting, right, is that he's added, there's an additional thing there, that is an identity. And that creates something that exists, I guess.
I mean, Descartes is treating thinking as a verb. In my
Well,
reformulation,
and
I
then there's
treated it
lots of arguments where people talk about the Latin that he uses, and
cogito ergo sum.
where yeah, where they look specifically at the Latin, and there's some, man, I wish I remembered more about Descartes, but there are some arguments that say that like he doesn't commit any of these errors, and there are very complicated philosophical rebuttals to the linguistic
Oh
arguments
yeah,
against Descartes because I don't do I don't
absolutely.
speak Latin. I don't understand them. But
No,
my
you just
understanding
speak
is,
Sanskrit.
well, I don't. But my understanding is that like there's good credence to like not be so hard on Descartes for what he says or how it's written.
Oh, it's easy. Yeah, it's like attacking Socrates. You know, every sophomore undergrad thinks they found a contradiction in Socrates and ergo are smarter than him and have disproved him, undermined all of Western philosophy. It's like, no,
Yeah.
obviously Descartes is
Yeah.
and remains foundational thinker, um,
Right.
but there's still unquestioned assumptions here. Like
Right. Well, I mean
you
that's what's interesting.
mhm. And so Metzinger's argument that the self is a model
Right.
is like we established the reasons why the web camera is not a self,
Right.
because while it's receiving sensations or sense impressions, it is not doing this extra thing that we call perceiving. It's not organizing them.
So the self model doesn't do that.
But the self model brings together the raw data of sensation, memory, and action response, among many other things. The self model collects all these disparate parts and organizes them into an illusion, according to Metzinger, an illusion of an agent. And
Okay.
one of the big issues there is agency, in that there's quite a bit of neurological research suggesting decisions get made by the brain significantly before
Right.
the conscious self decides.
Yeah.
Uh,
Let me see if I can
so there's
find that while you're talking about it.
yeah, and that's a big one. It's not, again, it's not that the locus of perception doesn't exist. It's this notion of a unified self, that the decision maker responding to perception, the thinker, is an artifact and an effect of a process that is largely occurring unconsciously. So I don't think uh, thoughts present themselves. I observe the thoughts as they're going by, which proves that something exists. But whether it's an I, whether the same I that notices the thoughts, whether that's identical with the I that is proclaiming I exist or with the source of the thought, is what this whole area of thought is challenging.
Let me share this image here real quick. There we go. Can we read that? You
Um,
probably can't read it, but here, I put up a chart here. It says
oh,
people are asked to note the exact time on the precise check clock when they when they first decide to press a button. Electrodes on the scalp reveal the activity in the brain about half a second before they are conscious of their decision to press. So they have this string of brain activity, and then they become aware of the fact that they're going to press the button, and then they press the button, even though the activity has started. So this, for those that don't understand what this says, the voltage of the neurons, or I guess this is supposed to represent one neuron, but the voltage of the neurons is increasing before the subject right at the subject is essentially aware of the action right as the action potential is about to occur. Right? So the brain doesn't even bother to give the subject any information about what it's decided to do, right? Until the action potential has already occurred,
yeah,
essentially. Right? There's very little time for the brain to feed back here to stop it, even though 200 milliseconds in brain time is like almost like an eternity. So there's some argument there as to whether or not one could give some feedback. 200 milliseconds is definitely enough time to inhibit a response, actually. If you think
sure,
about
but
gaming,
from where?
from where? From the prefrontal
Yeah,
cortex?
when you say one for one to give a response, there's a separation there between the one that is inhibiting or not failing to inhibit the neural impulse.
Well, I don't think of a one. I think of the prefrontal cortex inhibiting the response to the action
Okay,
potential of the neurons. I don't even
so
bother to think that there's a self there or anything. I just think that there could be some and this is where maybe the argument gets a little fuzzy, and this is probably where we would start to go to like bundle theory with Hume, right? It's that there's these conflicting bundles now, right? Like I always imagine,
mm,
well, what is the conflicting bundle? And maybe for anybody who's playing video games or interested in that kind of thing, the question, the pressing a button, right? The question is, at what point can I stop myself? I'm aware 200 milliseconds before I'm going to push the button to heal myself or to heal my friend, right? Um, but at what point in that period of activation am I aware that that activity is going to occur, and can I respond to inhibit the activity? Say like situation changes, right? And I've made a different assessment of what's occurring 50 milliseconds into my becoming aware of my decision to press the button. Right.
yeah,
It seems like I have sufficient time there to respond.
probably, especially because I imagine not being at that level of gaming myself, but I know when I am attempting to play a game like that, it takes me several seconds to go through the process of, okay, I need to do this operation. I need to think about how I do this operation. I need to decide to do this, press the button. Like, as you start to build up the muscle memory and the reaction time, conscious thought really does start to get pulled out of the equation entirely. So you might not even be attending to what you're doing. You're doing it. You're reacting
Right.
to the
So
information.
my question is at this point then, at what point is this study just a representation? This is my critique. Is that what at
Mm-hmm.
what point is this study just showing that habituated behaviors have, and it to me what this study shows is that there is a habituation window where the you can we're trained to push buttons, right? I think that if this was a completely, because I don't think this has ever been replicated on a completely novel task, I think that we would see
Oh,
very different results on a completely novel task. So what I think this
hmm.
shows is that you have habituated activation with a 200 millisecond window of downward stream situational awareness control intervention time.
Well, the intervention time, it's not 200 milliseconds. The
No, that's what
action
it says.
potential starts. Well, that's when it starts rising.
But I
When the
could.
person,
My point is that
oh,
that's
okay,
enough time to inhibit the action potential.
assuming one is aware.
But they are aware. It says when they're aware. It says they're 200
It's
milliseconds before the button is pushed. They're aware.
uh-huh.
And if
But it was already beginning to rise prior
yeah,
to them
I
becoming
understand
aware.
that, but
That's the
200
point. Yeah.
milliseconds in brain time is more than enough time to inhibit that
That's
behavior.
that's a fifth of a second. That's I mean a person can perceive that.
Of course, but that's also way more than enough time to inhibit the behavior.
Yeah.
So what this shows me is that you can have a habituated response to to something, right? That your brain can then observe and stop from happening. This doesn't show me that free will doesn't exist. It just
Well, I
shows
don't
me,
think it shows that.
no, well, this is the study that's supposed to show that free will doesn't exist.
I think that's
Well,
a very strong
for those who aren't familiar with it, the study is Benjamin Libert's free will experiment. He did this with a whole bunch of participants. This has been touted at the World Science Festival. This has been talked about in many different places. Feel free
mhm.
to look it up for yourself. Very, very, very much used. I mean, Sam Harris has talked about this. Very, very used by pretty much anybody who's a denier of free will. They're going to use this experiment and they're going to
Oh, of
tell you
course.
what they see in it, and they're going to show you, they're going to tell you that this shows that you don't have free will. And I think
Yeah.
that, with given my explanation, maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I'd love to have somebody tell me why that's wrong. Um, I would absolutely love, and I would absolutely love to see a novel experiment done with using this kind of concept on stuff that you had never seen before. And I guarantee, well, I don't guarantee you, but my hypothesis is that this first strings of brain activity would be significantly sharper.
I think anyone who claims this study by itself disproves free will is making way too strong a
Well,
claim
many people
on the
think that
basis
this
of it.
study and studies like it disprove free will.
And
This is
that's
the
the key.
one. If you hear somebody talking about free will being disproven, this is what they're talking about.
Well, sure, that's what I did, but my what I'm trying to say is I don't think by itself this like it, that's how research goes in general. It's you accumulate a collection of
Right, but
data.
my understanding
And
is
no
that
one
there is a
study is
collection of research surrounding this topic. This is
yes, of which this is the canonical example.
and what I'm trying to do here is give the audience, if there is people in the future who want to watch this or have experience with this, uh, the tools to go ahead and critically and clarifyingly think for themselves about the topic and do their
Oh,
own research.
100%.
Um, it's out there for anybody to see. I think that maybe we continue on the topic of a person
Yeah,
and move away a little bit from free will. Maybe
free will carry.
that has a little bit to do with I guess what it is to be a person, and probably something that I've noticed as a something that runs throughout this is we see the beginning of people thinking about what it is to be a person in like Socrates, Plato, Confucius, Buddha, earlier maybe in Indian thought because of the Atman and things like this. But that all comes in relationship to people starting to live together, right?
Mm.
And starting to choose what they're doing with their lives in a more concrete way where they're not as stuck and chained to the grind of being like a farmer, even though like that's pretty much what it was like for 99.99% of most people for their entire lives. But we see philosophy kind of rise up in the aristocratic classes across all these things. So obviously, the Buddha was a prince, Confucius was a minister. Um, Plato and well, Socrates lived on the streets and was a beggar pretty much. So
Possibly a wrestler.
possibly a wrestler. Who really knows? He was probably a warrior too,
Mhm.
and if he existed,
Well, he was attested to be a warrior,
if he
certainly,
existed, it's
if he
it's not
existed.
even sure that he actually
Hmm.
existed, even though he probably did.
Lao Tzu
Um,
was a bum and
Lao
proud
Tzu
of
was
it.
a bum, and Plato wanted to be a scholar of the. He was the scholar of the highest degree, but he wanted to be recognized because he didn't get to teach at the academy, right? Or is that Aristotle? Aristotle didn't get to teach at the academy. Is that right? One of the two.
Um, there was I don't remember that history. There was the Academy and the Lyceum. I thought they founded those respectively. Uh,
It would have been Plato that founded it. Let me look.
right. So then Aristotle wouldn't have been able to teach there, which is why he would have founded his own thing.
Yeah.
And then Alexander the Great. And my current favorite part of history, Alexander taking Pyrrho with him to India and encountering the gymnosophists of India, the naked philosophers. And then a few centuries later, Pyrrhonic skepticism showing up in the works of Nagarjuna, with the tetralemma, among other
Ah.
things, and the disproof of the possibility of real knowledge. Yeah, the similarities between
Yeah.
Pyrrhonism and
For another
Nabhagata are great.
podcast. The
For another
the
podcast.
disproof of the possibility of real knowledge. What
Yes.
a fascinating topic, actually. That is beautifully sprouted from interaction between multiple cultures, and
Mhm.
which I'm sure many Indian scholars would argue originated in India.
Oh yeah, well I mean the causal arrow once again there could have been importation of Greek knowledge into India and there was also probably a lot of importation of Indian knowledge into the areas of Greece
Yeah.
especially around the time of the emergence of Christianity.
Yeah, it's hard to know really, given the history, what was known by all these peoples because of how finicky the scripts are and, war and famine and, just general economic struggle and all the different
Hmm.
factors in human life that come to, produce outcomes for different texts. When you start to study these things, you start to realize that almost none of it survives. You're reading translations of a translation, and that's about as good as you could ever want it to be. And if you are reading anything that is the actual thing itself, it's mostly like pulled together from like people who've cited the text in their works. Um, so a lot of these ideas, I mean, with exception of like some of the ancient texts like the Mahabharata and other, really, um, you know, big canonical Indian texts, I think, um, it's hard to really know what concepts they were necessarily working with or what was part of the lexical environment or the argumentative environment of their time and what ideas got
Mm.
shot down, what ideas didn't live. But it seems like personhood has been a core concept for almost every society that we've ever had, right? I mean, we think about it. We've mentioned, China, India, the West. We haven't mentioned anything from about Native American or African philosophy, or um, Central American philosophy. That's just because it's, it's not studied. It's completely
Not
absent, and their
studied.
concepts of the person are completely absent in the Western canon. And that I think is a huge, huge failing of philosophy and of the academy in general to try to bring
Well,
those traditions into the fold. But as we just mentioned, part of the reason for that is the environments that they that those cultures exist in, the economic and social environments that produce those cultures.
oh yeah, yeah, and there's certainly knowledge to be gathered there
Oh,
and
absolutely. I
research
think
to be
very,
done.
very, very
Um,
much.
but the same factors that you mentioned were redoubled, like the between economic and political upheavals. Like so much of the knowledge in the Americas was actively erased,
Yeah,
and now by Western colonizers. And so going back and trying to reconstruct that, it's a worthy endeavor, but it's difficult. And like you said, it's simply not discussed. Same with Africa. Timbuktu had one of the largest universities of its time. It was an absolute center of learning, and there's no doubt that these sorts of discussions were carried on there. So worth doing the research and seeing what's available. I think the the free will discussion, I mean, that gets imported into the self discussion, but that assumes that selves require agency as part of that general definition. And one could imagine a self that is still like one could imagine a person that, despite perhaps not having agency, nevertheless retains personhood. And
sure.
I
I think
think,
that's important, right? Is that
yeah,
we recognize personhood as not necessarily, but sufficiently, maybe containing agency, right?
yeah,
Right. Because
and it's
personhood
an
is
important,
important.
yeah, well, it's important, and it's important on ethical levels as well as purely conceptual levels, because what to whom we decide, we I say, to whom personhood is assigned, and then to whom personhood is not assigned, makes a huge difference in how people interact with each other and with others.
Right. And I think
So I
personhood
think,
has defined a lot of what we, I mean, the whole American experiment is based on this concept of personhood and rights, and that people are endowed rights by their creator, right? It
mm,
creates this strong ontological and religious format that endows persons with existentiality, right? And part of that, I think, is now seeping into this conversation about what it is to be a person at what period, right? Are we persons at the moment of conception, right? Which is now the Supreme Court is starting to question, or are we persons when our mother gives birth to us? And this is, a foundational question of our time. And it seems like the answer that the Supreme Court has decided on is that persons are what the states decide they are, and that the and which seems to me to be an interesting understanding of the concept, even though I understand that the primary ruling is about like a person's right to privacy.
that was
But
what
uh,
Roe v. Wade was.
right, so the question is, do persons have privacy? I guess. And what is a person anyway? Do you are you willing to like commit to any idea that you think that people would say a person is now, especially given it's like the political stance? And maybe we should differentiate the type of persons we're talking about when we say like, well, there isn't a person or being no one. What does that even mean when we obviously have flushed out this concept that personhood exists, at least conceptually in our society, and it endows us with our rights, and it's the foothold that gives us the ability to act in this world.
You, I part of what just happened there was a shift from the philosophical or neurological definition of a person to the legal definition of a person.
Sure.
And legal definitions are they're completely constructed. We know they're constructed. They're explicitly arbitrary. Corporations have personhood. Uh, do corporations have and literally the word corporation comes from corpus. It's the same root as corpse. So corporations are bodies in a legal and in a linguistic sense. And part of the reason that exists is to shift liability. If a corporation causes the deaths of X number of people, individuals constituting that corporation may or may not be held liable. But the point is that it's a legal definition and it is purely constructed. I hope, I don't believe very many people are suggesting corporations are conscious or have perceptual selves, and I hope that's not the case because, needless to say, that would be terrifying. Um, Earlier we were talking about selves and we were relating it to perception, we were relating it to agency. Obviously, newborns have very little of either. It's not even it's not until many months of development that a newborn even begins to develop what appears to be an awareness of its environment and an ability to respond to the environment beyond a basic mechanical level. Obviously, most of us don't have memories going back beyond, in my case, it's about 4 is the earliest I can
I
remember
can't remember.
myself existing. You can or you can't.
I mean, I'd have to think about it. I don't.
I have
I
a
don't know.
very clear first memory, may or may not be the case. It's
I
location
don't.
specific. Um, it was about when I was 4 or 5, and
It's interesting.
yeah, beyond that, which so again, self, like my memory of my self existence isn't there. We know human development proceeds through fairly well defined stages, though obviously there's tremendous variation amongst individuals. And I don't think like that notion of self is very separate from the notion of personhood that an infant has, unarguably, and the notion that is being argued about currently, whether a fetus that has not yet left the womb still possesses those that definition. And then going all the way back to a multi-celled blastula, just a little dot of essentially unified stem cells that doesn't have organs, doesn't have nerves or a nervous system or anything like that, does that still retain the notion of personhood in potentia? And yeah, rights, it goes back to, well, it doesn't go back to, but it's associated with, in the legal context, the notion of rights and how we even ascribe rights to inanimate objects that uh, nobody would call people, or nobody would call selves. Maybe I guess there is the ascription of personality to buildings, to monuments, things like that. But very few people outside of a spiritual, metaphysical sense are going to make the claim that structures, for instance, perceive. Or I don't know. I'm even as I think about that, I'm starting to backpedal. So, what do you think about the ascription of rights to property, to national monuments, to historical buildings and artifacts? How do you think that relates to ascription of rights to persons?
I mean, I don't really. I never really understood why corporations are people. To be honest with you, the inanimate, like the legal. I think that like the separation between the legal person and like what we consider like a human person or a human being are like so different that it's like they're almost in completely different worlds. Like when we consider corporations people, it seems to me to be completely absurd. Um, yeah, it seems to me only to be a tool to move money into politicians' pockets. I
Well,
just
not
can't.
only.
I mean, maybe, but it seems to me that that's like the primary purpose of like the Citizens United ruling. Um,
Probably. The reason limited liability corporations exist is essentially to separate a corporation's finances from an individual's finances,
right. I
such
understand
that
that,
if
but
you have a
they don't need to
business
be a
venture,
person in order
yeah,
to do that. They can just be a business.
they do though. Like legally, they have to exist.
They can exist as a
Uh,
business, though. Why do they have to exist as a person?
I think that's why the discussion over ascribing personhood to, like, okay, so it exists as a business, right? It exists as a separate
They
entity.
can't vote, though,
Does
right?
No, they can't vote,
Yeah, they can't vote.
but what the Supreme Court decision was that this separate entity has its own right to free speech, to
Oh,
my understanding.
I see.
That this legal entity, and so then that became corporations or people. It's that the corporation, the legal entity that is distinct from any biologically instantiated organism, this collection of money and plant and capital and employees and managers and all that, that entity has its own right to free speech,
I
which
see.
which raises the question of whether it has a right to keep and bear arms.
Right. I mean,
Fun.
if you can only give it one, does it only have that one right then?
Well, there was a brief period of time where Pepsi had the third largest navy in the world. Uh, it bought a bunch of scrap ships from the Soviet Union and then sold them to be scrapped and recycled. But between the point when it purchased the ships and the point when it sold them to the recyclers and metal scrappers, Pepsi had the third largest navy in the world.
That's
Which again,
fascinating.
the ships probably didn't move in that time. They're the entities that controlled them shifted on paper, and so the ship's status changed as far as who they belong to.
Right.
Uh, but yeah, it's the rights of corporate persons as compared to the rights of various biological persons
Mm-hmm.
is another. The information is out there. Like we could speculate, but it's worth looking into what is actually the case.
And I think this leads us to the perfect next topic that we have, which is the bipartisan gun bill.
Oh
Oh man,
God.
what a beautiful, just
What is happening?
beautiful thing. That let's look at this one article here.
Which one article? Because I have seen so much
New
contradictory
York
information
Times
going
here.
on. New York Times when?
This is from. Let me look. 15th.
15th.
So two
Okay,
days
because
ago.
2 days ago, what
Two
is the
days ago.
Times claiming happened?
2 days ago,
Uh-huh.
people demonstrated, and nothing happened.
Nothing happened. Okay.
Yep, that's pretty much what it seems like is going on. It seems like Mitch
Because
McConnell is comfortable. It says he's comfortable,
okay.
whatever that
Because
means.
what I saw, and this is great,
I heard that
leading
they're going to
back
be able to pass it, but it's going to be very limited.
on the 13th, they were saying that the Senate reached a deal. They created a framework. There were 10 Republicans that decided to work with
Yeah,
Democrats, Corbyn among them, who from
see if we can
Texas.
find it.
That guy, we're not allowed to talk about that on Twitch, but I feel bad for the Republican senator from Texas, um, and the response he's going to get going back to his home state. Anyways, the story on the 13th was that kumbaya. We got 10 senators. That's great. What I saw today was that they walked out of negotiations.
There it is,
Um,
right there.
oh, there's the
It'll show up here
yeah.
in a second.
Senators reach bipartisan deal on
That was
gun
on the
safety. When
12th.
was this?
That was on the
That was
12th.
on the 12th.
Yep,
Yeah, because
12th.
today that the headlines that I'm seeing are that where was it? Yeah, Republican Senate gun negotiator walks out of talks. John Cornyn, I'm sorry, not Corbyn. John Cornyn is his name, Texas senator, uh, walked out of the discussions they were having. It appears as though there is not going to be a vote in the Senate before their 2-week Fourth of July recess. So the reports of the demise of free access to handguns or to assault rifles may have been premature because now they're walking it back.
And is this from The Guardian?
I can the one I was looking at was from BBC News. Um, but if you just look up
Oh,
Senate
there's a
gun
router. Here's
control,
a Reuters one. Here's perfect.
Reuters,
Reuters. Reuters
like
it
Euler.
is. Ah, I see. Uh, Here we go. Let me see. Yeah.
3 days. You got to find recent.
So this is from June 16th. This is the Reuters article saying exactly what you just said. Republican walks out of U.S. gun legislation talks. I don't know why the Democrats are hopeful. I honestly think they're probably not going to pass anything.
No.
And there's no reason um, to think that the Republicans have any interest in changing gun access to anybody. I mean, they started at the very beginning with the narrative that they will do anything that they can to make the changes that would have stopped certain shootings from happening. But
Mm-hmm.
that is very difficult to do, given that most people who do shootings are law-abiding citizens before they do the shooting. And to put psychologists in the point where they're determining whether people are capable or not capable of owning a firearm is without like any real clear rules. Like we can see how like negotiations just fall apart. It's like how do you start defining these people, right? How do we go back to our previous discussion? What bundles or whatever? How do we even look at the person and make a determination based on that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously we can all agree that you know there's a problem, but it seems that what it is to do to solve it is, I mean, a lot of the Republicans seem to just think that free choice, the ability to do what you want and follow the amendments or the Constitution is should be sufficient, and we should be willing to accept that. So
Yeah, the number one, according to one source, the Herald Democrat, I would have to confirm this. The number one cause of death for children is gunshot.
I believe that.
So the the Republican stance on choice and its relation to the living or ceasing to live of childlike persons is a fascinating tapestry of contradictions.
Yeah, I
Be that
honestly
as
don't
it may,
understand that. It doesn't make any sense to me. I think the
mm-mm.
biggest problem, and one of the points that was made on PBS News during the very beginning of the abortion debate, to I think it was like the Louisiana Attorney General or one of the Attorney Generals, they were talking about outcomes in their state for children, and they had very, very poor outcomes for children in their state. And the question was, well, you're banning abortion, and so what are you going to do to increase the outcomes because you can't do anything for the children that you currently have. You're having
Mm,
huge problems for the children that you currently have. So I think the question is if you're going to if you're going to ban something, then you need to provide an additional solution to make sense of if they say they're going to save X amount of lives every year. Okay, well then I need a concrete explanation for how you're going to feed those extra lives, how you're going to provide for their mothers, what kind of services that you're going to do, right? Because
what?
they tried to work within the system of capitalism by taking care of themselves, and
Who? The kids?
no, the people by getting an abortion.
Oh
That's the
yeah.
problem with capitalism is that it forces people out to make choices for themselves that the government then wants to regulate. This makes
Mm.
absolutely no sense. Like we they just can't afford to have children. That's why most people don't want to. You know, it's not a good time in their life. Like, there's a million reasons, right? There's millions of
Oh
reasons,
yeah.
right? Each person has their own reason, but
Yeah, and expense is a huge one.
Expense is a huge
Um,
one. Putting a person in the world costs like $1 million or $500,000 or something like this. It's absurd.
yep.
People are a lot.
So yeah, the yeah, so the lives they wind up living, the upbringings that the children wind up having in an area that does not have substantial social support,
Yep.
they wind up child development. They wind up with suboptimal outcomes,
Yep.
whether it's emotional support, whether it's availability of food, education, all of that. So we have a generation. Incidentally, that's one of the, you're probably familiar with this, one of the hypotheses surrounding the sudden drop, the end of the crime wave in the 90s was the passage of Roe v. Wade in the 70s. Some people have suggested that there was a generation, once women had better access to abortions, 20 years later, there's a whole generation of young men who otherwise would have grown up in poverty without without these resources available to them, who may have wound up going into lives of crime, and instead their mothers were able to live their own lives. So it's, I don't know how much substantiation the hypothesis has, but it's certainly compelling, and it'll be interesting to see what happens
When
in
did we
another
get
20
lead
years.
out of gasoline?
Oh God, that was the mid '70s too.
Yeah, so that has been also linked to crime.
mm,
Lead is a huge, huge problem for,
neurotoxin?
yeah, it's a neurotoxin. It never goes away.
Nope.
So
Everybody who grew up,
yeah,
yeah,
everybody who grew
so
up has lead in their brains.
who grew up before the '70s,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
between
And
between the
then
'70s and like when,
and then
yeah,
all their parents had high levels of lead in their blood too. Like, I mean, any level of lead in your blood is high. You shouldn't have lead in your blood at all.
yeah,
It's really
no.
bad. It sticks to your neurons and doesn't leave.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that there's a lot of different factors that went into that. And I mean, obviously,
Uh-huh.
the more choice that you give people, I think the better off you are, right? That's that's what our Constitution was founded on. That's freedom of speech, ability to own guns, um, the ability to vote, the ability for everyone to vote, which, we had to amend in, but we all agree, right, that it's
No,
better for
it's
more
not.
people to have a voice than less people to have a voice.
Well, we don't all agree on that at all. You and I agree on that for sure.
Okay, well, fair
But
enough.
there are lots of very strong opinions on who should be prevented from having a voice. Um,
Yeah, that's true.
my political science professor made a very, very good point. She outlined the distinction between a formal choice and a practical choice. And a formal choice is a choice in writing. Okay, you have the freedom to own a gun. You have the freedom of choice to do this, that, the other. Formal choice is versus a practical choice is like when the options are realistic. So your money or your life is a good
Right.
example. Somebody holds a gun on you, demands your wallet. You have a choice. You can give them your wallet or they can shoot you. But that's not really a choice. You can choose to starve to death, or you can choose to work in whatever profession is available, legal or not, in order to be able to afford enough food. It's not a practical choice. So a lot of what people are being left with are lots of formal choices where yes, you can choose to starve to death. Yes, you can choose to be homeless, or you can choose to do what you need to do and live with whom you need to live with in order to avoid being homeless. But that's not the same as providing the actual choices. A right to do this or that does not imply an ability to do this or that. And that's where social support comes in. That's where the idea that if people have practical options, if people have the option to go to school without, again, having to live in poverty or without having to sacrifice childcare, for instance, they'll take advantage of that option.
Yeah.
So yeah, choice is important. It's important to look at how the choices, how you cash that out in reality. Because if a woman has to choose between raising a child or going to school, give the options, provide for childcare, provide for alternatives to uh, whatever particular job one might be shuffled into. Anybody can go to school to become an engineer, but if the atmosphere, if the work environment of engineering, and I just pulled that out of a hat. It can be computers, it can be aerospace, it can be whatever you want. If the work environment is hostile to certain types of people, then fewer people are going to make that choice. So yeah, I completely agree with you that choice is important. It needs to be realistic choices provided.
Yeah. Well, speaking of realistic choices, or maybe unrealistic choices, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are just out of this world destroyed recently, man. This is just out of
Wow,
control. Look at this graph.
got worse
That
in the past
is
few days.
that is a bubble, two bubbles just popping as
Oh, ow,
about as hard as they could pop. Yeah,
2020. I mean,
that's an absolutely I mean, we're looking at maybe I don't want to necessarily speculate, but I've heard maybe $10,000 Bitcoin. I've heard yeah, $10,000 Bitcoin. This graph indicates that we're very much possibly going into this range. It tells me that all the this line specifically tells me that there are big sell-offs happening. Look at these
yeah.
two huge ones. There's just no green here. People trying to buy the dip maybe a little bit, but man, what an absolute nightmare. Absolute nightmare. I can't. It's like hard to believe really that this has happened, but I mean, this
Is
is
it?
this is a recession. I mean, people
Why
would
is it
speculate
hard
there
to
was
believe?
$1 trillion in Bitcoin, man. There's a
Uh-huh.
lot of money moving out of Bitcoin. I mean, this is half of its valuation, more than half of its three-quarters of its
Oh
three
yeah.
66% of its valuation. It's gone.
But if you look at the graph going further back, it looks like a correction. Like it looks like yeah, you had this peak many years ago, and then it went back and like if you try to fit a
This
trend
is a pretty
line,
crazy correction, man. I mean, I'll agree that like there's a correction, but man, that's a pretty crazy correction. That's a bubble,
yeah,
dude. It's a big
oh,
bubble.
100%.
It's a big bubble right there. What a
I'm just
nightmare.
not.
Feel bad for all those
Mm,
people who bought cryptocurrency thinking it was going to be the next thing, thinking it was going to be an investment. It doesn't seem like cryptocurrency has been an investment. And to be honest with you, the crypto markets seem to be pretty sketch. I don't know if you've ever dealt with them at all, but
not at all.
they are not great.
No. Um, yeah, I never got into it, and as an outsider, this is not terribly surprising.
Right.
Like whenever I heard about like just how expensive it was, because even 10,000 seems like a lot. Honestly, I'm not sure
Yeah, well, I mean, you have to ask yourself, what is Bitcoin doing? Like, right? What is it? How is it getting
what
that
purpose does it
value?
serve.
Like,
Uh-huh.
where is that
It's
coming from?
well, the value comes from its scarcity and I guess the term is non-fungibility.
Right, but the
Um,
question is, what is it scarce in relationship to? It's scarce in relationship to people wanting to buy it. So the only value it seemed to have is the ability for people to market it. Because you
it
couldn't buy anything with it.
yeah, and there was
And
I mean
any,
they
like,
were
any
starting to
amounts.
mhm. They were starting to talk about like Bitcoin wallets and this, that, and the other. I think the value wasn't just its scarcity. To my understanding, it was the way the blockchain was set up. Like it couldn't be um, I forget what the terms were, but there was something that made it more tangible than currency, than dollars, which are also valueless, but they are conventionally accepted and they serve as placeholders. And as
Right.
a placeholder, as a token currency, Bitcoin had the advantage of not you couldn't just print more of it.
Yeah, you couldn't print
Uh,
more of it. That was the
mhm.
touted benefit, but the only reason for that to move into where it was valuable is for you to be able to spend it.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Otherwise, it doesn't function as a currency.
yeah, and well, but that's the problem, right? Is that it took people 2 years to realize that nobody was going to use it as a currency.
Mm.
And that seemed to have failed. Nobody uses it as currency. Tesla tried. They sold all of it. They sold all of all of it. Their
I told you,
valuation
one of those
dropped when they bought all that Bitcoin.
I'm sure, and I can probably look this up, but I'm sure one of those significant drops in that graph is good old Musk selling his portfolio so he can attempt to buy Twitter. Um,
Maybe. This is
like if
impossible.
Tesla was trying to get into
You
it,
can't know.
some people made outrageous amounts of money.
Oh, yeah, they did because they
Like,
sold at the top.
uh,
But most people, if you look at this graph, didn't. They sold it. They
which,
bought. Look at that.
yeah,
Look how high it went. Look how people were pumping, dude. People were
yep.
pumping it so hard, and then all the people that had a bunch of it, they decided they didn't want to deal with it anymore, and they dropped it by 8 grand.
Holy crap. I'm going to send you a link
Sure.
because, wow, I'm just going to
Oh,
put it in the
oh no.
X channel here.
Ah.
Speaking of, apparently Elon Musk is getting sued over a pyramid scheme, cryptocurrency.
Oh yeah.
Nonsense. Yeah. Elon Musk suddenly hit with huge $258 billion crypto
Did
pyramid
you
scheme
send it to me?
lawsuit over Dogecoin. I put it in the Discord chat. Um, amid devastating Bitcoin and Ethereum price crash. So yeah, it could have been market manipulation. Um,
Let's go and look at that real quick.
Dogecoin lost more than 90% of its value, which was measured in cents rather than tens of thousands of dollars. Musk and his companies Tesla and SpaceX have been hit with a $258 billion lawsuit claiming they are part of a racketeering scheme to pump the Dogecoin price. It could be seeking class action status. The he's claiming that they claimed it was a legitimate investment when it has no value at all. This could be a show lawsuit. Like it could be more performative than real.
I mean, they're not wrong though. Uh, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, we'll obviously have to let a court of law to determine what the truth is here, but it seems to me that based on my experience, they they were touting things as investments. I mean, I don't think Elon ever actually said that it was an investment. I think that he was pretty clear that it was a crapshoot and not to spend all your money on it. But, it's hard to. We'll see, I guess.
Mm,
It'll be up to the people to prove it.
yep. Oh man, yeah, Dogecoin's price is ridiculous.
The
The
question
graph.
is where the. I just don't see the evidence that, like, I wish they would show, like, Elon Musk um, like a tweet where he said that. You know, like that would give a little bit more credence to this article, right? Where they quote him,
Well,
right? They quote him as saying this. Oh,
um,
right. They
it's
quote this person as saying that Elon Musk said this, but they never found there. I mean, all of the
he tweeted,
communication that would have given this guy this idea would have been in tweets, and
yeah.
there's no tweet provided that shows this. Is my point.
The lawsuit reads before going on, Dogecoin is simply a fraud whereby greater fools are deceived into buying the coin at a higher price. The lawsuit reads before going on to list Musk's multiple tweets and public statements that have pushed up the Dogecoin price over the last 18 months. And yeah, I mean, he tweets all the time. He also
Yeah, let's
drove the
look at his
Bitcoin
tweets.
price higher,
He gives an example of 40 some tweets. Yeah, but none of them actually say anything.
which is
It's
par for
just
the
him
course.
being a meme. It's just him being a meme guy,
Mm-hmm.
dude. He's just meme.
Man, the
Can
more
you see
memes,
this? The statement of
the more that
facts. Yeah, here it is.
the more memes show up in legal documents, the funnier law is going to
Dude,
become.
defendant must has been tweeting Dogecoin, right? This is one. Dogecoin value may vary. And then he says Dogecoin is my favorite cryptocurrency. It's pretty cool. And
Mm-hmm.
then yeah,
I've heard that name in years.
yeah,
So this looks like a fake lawsuit, really.
yeah,
Has accepted the appointment of CEO by virtue of his conduct. Yeah, no. Um,
yeah. It's just it doesn't make sense, man. Like, yeah, okay, fair enough.
it does look like the Bitcoin price was affected by Tesla
Yeah,
doing.
yeah, it was. It was.
Yeah, sorry. I thought that was real at first. The headline got me, but
Well,
it's a
it's on
performance lawsuit.
Forbes. Forbes is covering it. I mean,
Uh,
it's not bad. It's a reputable news source. I mean, not perfectly reputable, but
they've obviously got a slant, but they're better than many.
right.
Um, it's just one of those where like there's no one ideal source. I prefer Reuters and AP myself, but it's good to see different facets
Yeah.
and to know which ones are completely a mess. But yeah, like it's I think I doubt very like a lot of people got taken to the cleaners with the Bitcoin thing, but one has to wonder how many folks were there who just put everything they owned into Bitcoin, lost it all, and now their families, their houses are going to be foreclosed on, and they're like, one wonders how much um,
Well, most of those people that did that.
tangible suffering.
Well, I think the reality is that a lot of those people who put the money in didn't have that stuff. They,
Mm,
I from, I mean, my basic like kind of theory is that what happened is that a lot of people got money from the government, and the people in the crypto world realized that they could get these kids, right? Because if you look, like, I don't remember exactly where I saw it, but most of the people who've lost money in crypto have been African American and they've been under the age of 35.
really?
Yeah. So the the population that got hit by this is not your boomers, it's not your normal investors. It's the people who got money from the government and put it all into crypto, and then the people who had it sold it all and took it all from them essentially. There was just a redistribution of wealth, right? They got all this money that the government just gave them, and a lot of them just put all of their money in crypto. Like there's a good amount of people that I've talked to that put all of the money the government gave them into crypto that are our
Hmm.
age.
Mm-hmm.
And when you add up all that, no, I mean, how many people got money?
Most people got
Right?
some kind of stimulus.
Right? Well, and all the people who got stimulus money were people who made under $150,000 a year or whatever. right? I mean, some of those people use that money to, like, pay for their kids and stuff, but a lot of people like me, I didn't need that money. I bought a computer with
I
my money and stuff, but like, I did buy some cryptocurrency with that money because I'm like, it's free money. Who cares? Like I didn't need it. I used it as an opportunity to try to invest, try to
well,
make that money
certainly
the government gave me into more money, like a lot of other people did, and it screwed them.
if I mean, I obviously that needs
That
substantiation.
well, I mean
I
that's
think part of the issue
anecdotal
was that
evidence for sure. I mean that's me and a
yeah,
couple of my friends that did that.
yeah,
But I think that
yeah,
that's pretty. I think that's a pretty common thread. I think if you started asking people, you'd find that to be true. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm always down to be wrong.
yeah. I just think well, part of the issue was that there was so little stimulus money that was given. There was no way people were paying their bills
No,
with
yeah. What do you
what
do?
government put.
You
Yeah,
enjoy it.
it was an extra. It was a bonus.
Yeah.
Um,
People got a bonus and they
and
invested their bonus. They invested it.
maybe I'm sure lots of different people spent money on lots of different things.
That's
Um,
true, but there's no question that right after you see the stimulus, you start to see Bitcoin and all these other things go up. I mean, that's correlational evidence, not causal evidence.
yeah,
And there's no way to really know what drove the cost of Bitcoin up, right? That would take some serious and like serious investigation
sure,
with
but
some
how does
really deep
one?
tools.
Yeah, but how does one determine like what people spent their checks on and who lost? Because my question was who is losing money.
No one, no one that mattered is what I answered. No
What
one
is?
that had a noticeable outcome. Nobody that owned a house already, nobody that already had a bunch of kids, nobody that already, right? What happened was that all of people's savings, right, the money that they could have gotten rid of,
Uh,
was transferred to other people. And some people, I'm sure, got completely annihilated. Like, I personally know somebody who has to, like, I don't know exactly how much money they've lost, but based on what they've told me about how much they had, they've lost somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000
Whoa.
of unrealized losses. These are unrealized, right? Because it could go
Yeah,
back
so it's
up, blah 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 blah. But this is his portfolio right now is down
mhm.
tens of thousands of dollars. It has to be.
It's an opportunity cost.
Sure, and they could. I mean,
Like,
I believe my understanding is they're called unrealized losses,
yeah,
right?
yeah. So what they're
But
losing is what they could have spent the money on otherwise,
right, but they
in
haven't
lieu of
actually
investing it.
lost it yet either because
Okay.
they haven't sold it.
Uh-huh.
So that's why it's unrealized.
Yeah.
So it could theoretically go back up, right? Like theoretically, Bitcoin and all these other coins, they could just go back up, right? But based on what's happened, that's very unlikely to occur, given given the nature of what these coins are. Now, if somehow like they could create an ecosystem where these coins are spendable and I can put money in and use it and not get thrown around by minimums and maximums to transfer to my wallet and other things like this, that they did, where I have to spend $1,000 on Bitcoin in order to get my Bitcoin into a wallet, that is, I mean, as far as I can tell, as close to a scam as it gets. And the fact that I can't get my money out if I don't have enough in tells me that there's something fundamentally wrong with the way that things are working in the cryptocurrency world right now.
Hmm. So as of November 2021, 16% of Americans had invested in crypto.
And
Um,
what are their ages?
how many people?
Does it give the
As
demographics or no?
22.
You should send that to me. We are almost
Oh,
ready to wrap up though.
yeah. Hmm. Um, yeah, I mean, I think it's got to be careful. Like people, I get what you meant by who matters in terms of who has like substantial assets, but
Well, who
if
matters to your
poor
question
people,
is what I meant.
well, yeah, what my question was, what is the ultimate amount of suffering that has been produced by this. Like if people
People aren't going to be able to
who
retire
needed
at the
that
same
money,
time.
hmm
That's
yeah, if people needed
a
that
whole
money,
generation
and
isn't going to be able to retire at the same
yeah,
time.
but that's always been the case.
But that was
that
true. But we had an
that was
my point is that
prior.
we had an opportunity to not have that happen, and then a whole bunch of people got
Hmm.
scammed out of it. You may disagree, but
Okay,
a whole bunch of
55%
people got
of
scammed out of
Bitcoin
their money.
investors started in the last
Let's be
year.
real, bro.
Oh, it's not. It's a whole bunch of people definitely got scammed out of their money.
Yeah,
But
as
my
have
question
you
is,
ever bought
who are those
cryptocurrency?
people? No, I have
You
very
should.
little
You
idea how
if
these
you
websites work.
actually the more you look into it, unless you have like tens of thousands of dollars, your money gets locked in the market.
Yeah, because a single coin, if you can't buy a single coin, then you own a fraction of a coin, which means you own some sort of EFT that is invested in
But
coins.
that's not how it
Um,
works on cryptocurrencies because of the way that they're partitioned. It's not like a stock where
mhm.
they're partitioned like that. That you're buying individual bits. Like a Bitcoin actually has a name for its partitions, and you buy those. That's what you're trading. Just like a dollar has cents. They're partitioned out the same way. It's not like when you're buying a portion of a stock where you can't sell the whole stock. What I'm talking about is when in the crypto markets, what was happening is you would put money in, right? Say I went to Coinbase or whatever and I bought $200 worth of Bitcoin, right? And I wanted to get that money out of my account, right? What they would tell me is that I would need to buy $400 more of that coin in order to transfer it out of their system. Does that make sense?
More or less. And yeah, it does sound like
That is a
it's
scam.
designed to hold on to
It's
people's money.
designed, but not only that, it's
Yeah.
designed that you have to keep putting in money to get out your money.
Uh,
So it's stuck in
which is a
there.
pyramid scheme,
Yeah, but the thing is
effectively.
that but not only that, it's not a pyramid scheme. It's a scam. It may be like based on a pyramid scheme, but they don't tell you that when you're buying the coins, in order to get that money back, you have to have had X amount of money to begin with. All they tell you is that they're going to trade the coins for you. They're going to trade the money. They're going to let you purchase the currency and trade those currency. Once you're bought in, it's like buying video game currency. You can't get that money out. You're bought in. It's like
I
buying World of Warcraft gold. I'm not even kidding, bro. It
I
is
no, I
exactly
believe
like
you.
buying World of Warcraft gold. That's a perfect way of putting it because it's almost like it's not legal to get out again. And they made
Well,
it
and
that way. It's absurd.
ontolo ontologically speaking, it is physically identical to World of Warcraft gold.
Yeah, and that's my
Like it's
point.
literally video game currency. It's made of the same
It's
stuff.
yeah, dude, it's crazy. And they really, I mean, if it just do a little bit of investigation, like
Mm,
go make some Coinbase accounts and Coinbase Pro accounts and Binance
mm,
account. Go make an account and
mm.
just look and see how the product is presented and see how you purchase it. Just look at it. That's all. I'm definitely not telling you to buy any. I would not buy
No,
any.
but the
Just go
problem,
look.
see, the
They
problem
don't even
there
ask
is
for your
that at this
social.
point, yeah, well, based on what you've just described to me, even making an account and putting myself out there is something I would be skeptical to do.
I don't know why,
Uh,
but that's fine. I mean, you make your own choices with how you want to handle that, but
you don't know why because if
you
there's
don't give them
obvious
real
scams
information
going,
about yourself.
mm,
Come on, dude. You make a fake account. All I'm doing is telling you to go look. Like really like if you don't believe me or you're skeptical about what I'm saying,
I
go look.
didn't. Why would you assume I don't believe
I
anything
don't
you're
know.
saying?
I don't know.
I just don't
It's quite a claim though
care all that much. And what's the claim?
that all of the crypto websites are a scam. That's what I'm claiming.
Isn't
That they're designed to trick people. And I think
well,
the reason that you're starting to see the decline in the currency specifically is because people are starting to realize that it's
huh.
not anything real, which
Are
is
you
something you
familiar?
realized a long time ago, obviously.
It's
Since you
something I never
think it's so
didn't
funny that people
believe.
Yeah, you never believed in it.
Are you familiar with the
I think that's really interesting that you were like, fuck this shit. You saw it for what it was immediately, you know?
I wouldn't go that far. It was more just apathy.
Fair,
Um,
fair enough. Well, it's good apathy on your part, because I
like
mean, you
it looked
fucking hit
like
the
a
head on.
lot
You
of
fucking hit the
effort,
nail on
a
the head there.
lot of yeah, blockchain didn't seem. I understand that token currency is not real to begin with, but are you familiar with the Dutch? What were they? Bulbs, tulip,
The
the Dutch
tulip,
tulip bulb
yeah,
thing.
that
Yeah,
shit. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's what this is.
Yeah, it feels like that, huh?
The tulip bulbs were worth as much as houses.
But the question that here's the issue, right? Is that
Mm-hmm.
people thought that they could get in on all
Mm-hmm.
these altcoins and all this other stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
They thought that these altcoins would be the next Bitcoin. So what happened is there was all these other coins. They're called altcoins, right? Because they're all
Yeah.
traded through Bitcoin, right? So Bitcoin created this economy where you could buy other coins, and that was what you did with Bitcoin is you just bought other coins. So they created this ecosystem where there was you bought this valueless thing essentially that was worth what the people put into it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then people would create other coins for you to exchange for that stuff that you had already. And it
Mm-hmm.
created this like completely circular or self-enclosed system where it was like throwing dollars into a cash machine into like it was kind of like playing the slots, but you never got your money back.
Some people did though, and that was the point. Is
Some
the folks who
people
got
who
out
had their
at
money
the
in
right time.
oh god, dude.
Yeah,
Some people who
the
had their
folks who
money
got
in
out at the right
wallets
time.
did. But people
Uh,
who had their money on exchanges, those
oh,
people
probably. Yeah.
were in completely different situations. And
Oh,
that is what I've been trying to get at this entire
oh.
time. You
That
can't
everybody who was a low-level investor lost their money. The only people who could possibly have made money on the crest were the folks who already had a ton of money in it.
because those were the
I
only
get it,
people who could transfer their money into wallets to
and get it
sell the
out as cash.
coin.
Okay,
Otherwise, they were stuck dealing with the exchange. And
I get
that
it now.
ruined people, man. It ruined
Yeah,
people. It absolutely ruined people. And that is
because
what I'm super concerned about and what give merit to some of this stuff.
so ruined people who had a ton of money in it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If they had like their whole life savings in it, like if they had like 50, if they invested 50 grand or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Say they bought a couple coins. Or right, people who got Ethereum, right? People who bought Ethereum at like 3 grand or 3.5 and thought it was going to crest up to like, thought it was going to go to Bitcoin levels and then it went to like 4 and then dropped to I think it's 2 now.
Well, I was thinking like Tesla had holdings. Tesla had $1.5 billion in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
People like 50 Cent, Paris Hilton, Gwyneth Paltrow, Bill Gates, Serena Williams, Floyd Mayweather, Kanye West, Mike Tyson had Bitcoin. So
Yep.
like there were levels where there was tons and tons of money in there, and I'm wondering what happened. I mean, I'm sure they're fine, but it's interesting. That's fascinating the way it would be broken out, where anybody on the exchanges below a certain threshold could only have lost money, and then it was only above the threshold that you could have made money off of that crest.
I feel like
So
I mean I could be wrong about that, but based on my experience dealing with the exchanges and the way they make it so because when they talk about cryptocurrency, they tout it as this free and open thing that can be moved around and exchanged however you want it. That's not
yeah,
true.
which not at all. Again,
Nope.
part of the barrier for me was simply understanding, like
Yeah.
access, not even which it goes back to the whole thing we're talking about with formal choice. It's like, yes, it might be free, but it's so free that I have no idea what I need to know or do to even get it. There's no guidance and yeah, I didn't trust
See, and
exchanges like that.
that I think is what makes Bitcoin so attractive to people though, and other cryptocurrencies. Is that it's very
What?
free. It's so free that there's no rules, right? You can do whatever you
Mm.
want with it, and they
And
did.
this is what happens.
They
Again,
did.
we've seen that. We saw it with tulips. We saw it with The stock market back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, when you can do anything, this is what happens. Like structures exist for reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right.
So I did find an article, and it looks like, I mean, for one, the demographics of Bitcoin are overwhelmingly male, which is
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
About 70%. But it did look like Hispanics were slightly overrepresented,
Really?
relative, yeah, relative to the proportion of the larger population.
Yeah, that's what I
Um,
was reading is those people of color were the people who are most affected by this. I
yeah,
wonder if it's a word of mouth thing, like a phenomenon where like your cousin and his friends and all of them had some, so you bought some.
one explanation, this is CNBC, for that high adoption is that those users may be more likely to turn to cryptocurrencies for payments rather than for investments. So it's a currency exchange thing, for one.
But how
And
would they get the
alternate,
currency?
like you were just saying, because it's free, alternatives to traditional investing, alternatives to they're saying there are communities out there that need better ways to pay. So they're trying to move away from the dollar. Um, the same reason with use of like Western Union and whatnot. It's like as opposed to banking, the alternatives to traditional banking. Uh, but yeah, it says 24% of cryptocurrency owners are Hispanic versus 16% of all U.S. adults. Um,
That's
this was
interesting.
February of 22, though.
That's pretty
Um,
current though.
yeah, 69% of all U.S. adults are white. Only 62% of cryptocurrency owners are. So you were correct in that. Um,
So 40%, which is that's
yeah,
yeah,
Black Americans were underrepresented.
underrepresented.
Uh,
Okay.
yeah, 10% of all U.S. adults, 8% of cryptocurrency owners.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I mean that at that point you start getting into like discussions about immigrant populations, and everything is connected.
Yeah,
Absolutely
why
everything is
certain groups of
connected.
people buy cryptocurrency is super fascinating and I have absolutely no idea why they do that at
Mm.
all. And I don't think I have any idea of how I would even find out why. I can only speculate that it's like cultural and like word of
Separate
mouth.
research. Yeah, well, and economic. It has to do with access to banking. It has to do with access to
Uh,
currencies. Has to do with access to investments.
I guess
Separate
like
research from
what's confusing to me though is like why would you think that that's a better choice to banking? Like you can't
uh,
access banking because you're not legal?
possibly, or it
That
could
would make
be
sense then.
lack of information, or it could be because of what you're describing, the attraction being that it's so free and unregulated, don't want regulators paying attention to your finances.
Fair
Separate
enough.
research from Pew recently found Asian, Black, and Hispanic adults are more likely than white adults to have invested in, traded, or used cryptocurrency. Yeah, and they're saying one reason is not only as an investment, but as a means for paying for things. Like Hispanics were more likely to use crypto to pay for things compared to white cryptocurrency owners,
Yeah, I don't know
according
anybody
to.
or anything that I could pay for cryptocurrency with. Like as I said,
Hmm.
I honestly could never get enough Bitcoin to buy anything with it.
Hmm.
Every time I tried to buy Bitcoin to spend it, they would try to make me buy this absurd amount and I was like, "No."
Oh, another reason maybe the cryptocurrency is booming in Latin America,
Oh, okay.
particularly in countries like Argentina and Mexico, where inflation is higher than the U.S. That could inspire youth by U.S. Hispanics to want to send money to those countries. Um, yeah, and again, this is an article from February, so I think you're right. I think a lot of investors of color are going to wind up being significantly more impacted by this compared to white investors, which sadly tends to be a historical trend.
Right. But I don't
Uh,
really understand why that is. It just seems to be that the people, well, I mean, I guess they don't own most of it and they're using it in smaller increments and not as investments.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't know how or where one can pay for Bitcoin. I know they were
Me either.
advertising a Bitcoin debit card,
I don't
but
know. I don't know, man. I can't imagine. I legitimately have never seen a place I can buy anything with Bitcoin.
mm,
Maybe that's just because I live in a small town, but man, I don't know. It seems so far away from me. But when I talk to people who are in that ecosystem, it seems to be that it's more of like a personal transaction thing. Like I want to buy something from my friend, but
mm,
then to me, I was always like, well, why don't you just use cash?
who uses cash anymore?
I don't know.
Somebody tried to like send what was it? Somebody wanted to pay me back for buying them coffees. Uh,
In cash?
I no with Venmo. It's like I don't use
Maybe
Venmo.
it's
I
because I live in.
don't have Venmo set
Yeah,
up.
dude. Somebody tried to pay
Like
me with Venmo once too. I was like, "What is this? How does this
what?
even work?" I was like, "I
But
prefer
again,
cash, but whatever."
uh,
Maybe it's because
ignorance
I
is
live in
not evidence
Colorado.
against. Uh, ignorance isn't evidence against. So it could be the case that there are ways to buy things with crypto, just as like, Venmo is a thing that apparently people use to pay each other.
Yeah, that's
I don't
true.
know. You should read
That's
that
true.
CNBC article though, because
Yeah, send it to me.
it gives a breakdown of users of alternative financial services overall, uh, U.S. adults versus
Did
cryptocurrency
you send it
owners.
to me or no?
Yeah, I did. I put it in the Discord chat.
All right, let me see if I
Um,
can pull it up while
so
we're talking about it.
cryptocurrency owners were twice as likely to have purchased a money order from somewhere other than a bank or credit union, used Western Union or MoneyGram, cashed a check through a provider other than a bank or a credit union. Yeah, part of it is the ideal of what I understood to be the ideal of cryptocurrency is not needing to rely on the banks, which I'm all for in principle. Yeah, folks who are skeptical of banking in general, of the centralized nature. Uh, I mean, folks with cash under their mattress are getting wiped out too. At least not wiped out, but 10% inflation is definitely nuts. So,
Absolutely insane.
and the market's not keeping up with it.
No, it's not. It's a disaster.
But again, this is long term. This is a short term trend. Like long term, we'll see what happens with Bitcoin. We'll see what happens in markets overall.
So the representation of incomes is actually pretty even.
That's the Pew article from 20 November 21.
I wonder how much this changed.
A lot. I had seen another stat saying that 55% of cryptocurrency users created accounts within the past year.
That makes sense. Wild.
So yeah, that was November 21. February of 22, that article is what looks at the demographic breakdown.
Did you post that in general or what?
The link should be right below it.
I thought I clicked the one below it, but okay. I'll look again. Yeah, that is the one I clicked on. The lowest. I
Um,
clicked on
CNB,
the lowest one.
CNBC.
So
Yeah,
the one
so it's
above
the
it then.
CNBC one is the other one.
All right. There it is. Oh,
Yep. God, look at those gas prices.
oh wow. That's crazy.
Can tell how dated the article is.
Yeah, that's insane actually.
And you could probably cross reference that to look at what Bitcoin's value was. I mean, we know it was February 22, but if you still wanted to be like NCIS about it,
Well, we can look. We'll look right now. What day?
Should be on the article.
I know, but I wasn't on the article.
It was
February
February
8th.
22. February 8th, 22.
That's as close as I can get.
Oh, there you go.
$38,000. It
Yeah.
started its slide.
There was another little peak right there. But
Yeah,
yeah,
this
it
is
had
when people
already
were
started
hopeful.
dropping.
This is when people thought that Russia wasn't going to invade Ukraine.
Right.
And then Russia invades Ukraine.
And that might have had something to do with the gas prices too.
Yep. And I think that's where we leave it. Yeah?
Until next time.
Until
Yep.
next time on Clarifying Thought with Mike and Dave.
It's been real.
Thanks for watching.